The general subject of tonight's service, is the binaries and then some. Over the last 6 or 8 months, out of you people here and those in other places writing me notes from the books and from the tapes, one of the most general questions presented in areas in which people express a great deal of doubt is whether there's any way that they'll ever be able to understand what in the hell I may mean by being able to see in threes, being able to get some conception that there are 3 kinds of events, eventualities, persuasions, currents going on, and that everyone can very easily see on one hand and then withal. But who, how, when will I ever be able to get any conception of what would be the third one? How can I see a third possibility? And people ask it very seriously. It is not unlikely that whatever I do more publicly, that may become the center point of what appears to be the public phase of this. And it may have a brand new term. It may be presented as being right at the heart, instead of a mystical Muslim, perhaps, being told that the way to paradise, the way to a great awakening, is to forever remember the name of God. Or for a down-home Christian to be told, all right, the thing is to be born again, to be saved, to give your little heart to little Jesus. It is not unlikely that I will make this the heart of it, because it is up to date. It is, in fact, a prime way in which to approach all of this. So I'm going into it a bit more. I will note for you now, as you will see later, if in fact I do that which I've threatened to do, that it will have to be presented as something that can be done by following these steps. And whether the people involved are interested enough to actually follow the steps, it is always held out in the same way that religions and would-be mystical systems have always been holding out through life's own promise of its own tomorrow, that, hey, you could be doing this. And if you're not doing it right now, if you're not experiencing it, you're not doing the teachings of the church, of the system. You're not doing the dictates of the program, or else you would succeed, and here you would be able to see in 3 ways. And therefore everyone's satisfied, because those who need no more than a superficial blow can feel like, ooh, I found the secret and I can't do it, and I'm still no good, and I knew it, and I'm glad to be around decent people, more intelligent people than I used to be around the Powerhouse Assembly of God. These people are more intelligent, and I'm glad to be somewhere that I can suffer on a new level, that I can miss the mark around better people. Beyond all of that, let me point out to all of you, literally, among the other ways I could present it, but this is a prime, contemporary, and it meets all the qualifications, a prime way to present what this has always been about and bring it up to date, and to state to you that without the realization, without you being able to do in the numerous ways I've mentioned it, to activate systems, to expand all of the circuits in a lateral manner, to the point that in fact you probably have no untouched, strange, exotic areas within yourself. Until you can do that, everything else is really theory, it's philosophy, it's a teaching, it's not an experience. Because as long as you're left in the binary bind, as most of humanity is now, right up until today, still destined to do, fulfilling their function correctly, but as long as you are left to that, you've got to be, or begin to see that you can write me questions forever. You could go back to religion and pray to your gods, your forefathers' gods. You could go to a psychiatrist. You could write letters to Dear Abby. You can sit around and talk to your own internal partner about how bad business is, and it's always on this basis. All questions that you could send to me, a psychologist, a priest, a rabbi, if you'll note, they're always on the basis that it's me against a problem. All you're stating are 2 forces. And the only thing that's possible when you're limited to the binary connection is you can switch them around. my wife, my girlfriend, my sexual partner mistreats me. I like her pretty good, but she's overbearing. What can I do? There is no difference between that and saying, evil spirits are after me. They're fighting for my soul, and I cannot live a good, upright life. Tell me, dear Reverend, dear man of the cloth, what can I do? As long as it is set up that it's a binary struggle, there is no way out. Not on an individual level. It will not lead to any sort of understanding. All you can do is switch around the names of the participants. Or you can say, well, since I've been going into therapy, I don't let my girlfriend push me around as much. But you've still got a binary problem. Or a person can say, since I have taken up with religion X, I feel a little bit better about the possible eventualities of eternity. I do not feel as though I'm having the same kind of outrageous, frightening nightmares I had about my fellow man, about the forces in the universe. But you're still playing with a binary problem, and all it does is go round and round. You can change the names of it, and you say, hey, the good guys are winning. No, today the bad guys are winning. Today I can tolerate my girlfriend, but yesterday she was driving me crazy. I can get along with my family until they come to visit. It is a dance, and you can change, you can plug in any terms you want to instead of just forces or eventualities or persuasions, until you see that all of life is arranged as far as man can conceive it in the highest branches of the ordinarily produced and wired up yellow circuit, in the scientific realms, into the realms of philosophy, logic, which in one stream would obviously, horizontally speaking, be at the same kind of level of hard science. But as far back as the yellow circuit's been going and man's been playing with the idea of philosophy, nothing has changed. The good guys win for one decade, then the bad guys win. One group of philosophers seem to take over in one part of life's body, France, Germany, and says life sucks. A decade later, life is beautiful. But nothing has changed. It's two blanks. I just call them C and D. You just put C and then put a blank, and put anything you want to. My girlfriend, the good guys, the bad guys, the weather, opportunities, talent, birth, financial situation, and whatever it is, there is always a D to it. You can't find a C without a D, and of course you can't find a D without a C. You would not even conceive of it individually. Life would not have it brought to your attention. As long as you're left with the binary binders, nothing changes. Take these two blanks that you filled in with your own descriptions, and it is a dance. C leads, then D leads. To believe that it is some kind of philosophical idea, to believe that it's something I conjured up, to believe that it's something that's impossible to perceive, is a sad state to contemplate if any of you staying here this long and to think that it's beyond reach. It's what it's about. I'm going to try and pull your attention slightly different, which I do every week, from where you may be stuck in this. Let me point out to you again, all of you should have done this on your own, but I always seem to step on some virgin areas of everyone's foot when I bring it up again, that you can see quite simply that all of life can be filled in the C or D blank. That insofar as man's consciousness, not the way things are now, but insofar as man's consciousness, all the way from bricklayers to priests, to philosophers, to physicists, psychologists, economists, political observers, artists, musicians, all of life has been arranged into two camps. There is this dance, there is a kind of struggle as to who is apparently leading right this second. Is C leading and D following, or vice versa, from your viewpoint, from a collective viewpoint of some group? But another way that you should try and remember, if I don't mention it often enough, is this C and D blank is take the way life has made men commonly phrase some of these common divisions into the liberal and to the conservative. speaking politically, and I can drag it, of course, into almost any other area without even changing the terms. As far back as the Yellow Circuit has been going, and writing down history, you have had in every area of human endeavor, from the arts to politics, has been what appears to be two, at least figuratively, armed camps. Now, politically, it's always been, or we'll go ahead and use the term, they got versions of it in every language I've ever seen translated, and what little few I could read, into conservative and liberals. And they even, as a side hobby, even today, they argue over exactly what does that mean. And I've told you what it means. I've given you a broader description based upon the triad. That on the C and D struggle, let's start politically. Conservatives are those that are in charge of defending the status quo, no matter what else they say. You fill in the D blank and you can call D defensive. Whatever's going on, no matter what the civilization is, no matter what the political system is, those within that area, within that time and place, that have been labeled by some other group in that area, in that time and place, as being conservative, they are in charge of, hey, things are fine. If we drew a line really above the red level in the great corporation, you're beginning to stretch. If you go above it, you're beginning to stretch into what the Red Circuit would be considering liberal, that things are fine. Conservatives could be seen as cool, all the way from cool to cold, all the way from cool to cold to old, not just individual participants. But you will notice, you might call it fortuitous if you like. In America, they're oftentimes referred to as the old guard. They make attempts, life makes attempts through them to describe it in more intellectually appealing tones, such as, if it's not broke, don't fix it. That we're in favor of progress as much as anybody, but liberals are going way too far. They want to muck about and change everything simply for the sake of changing it, which is not a bad attack. That is not a complete misfiring on their part. But if you're caught up into the binary boundary and got to take sides, then it all makes sense. That, yeah, they're right. The D forces are right. These other forces, they carry everything to an extreme, and no matter what's going on, they want to fool around with it. They want to change it, and I see no good reason. It's going perfectly well right now. You can see it as being a kind of struggle between that which is losing heat and that which is attempting to produce new heat. Of course, not falling into any foolish, childish trap of believing that the people involved are the people involved. It's life involved. And these are the employees. It's those working in the store, remember, and they can't help it. They only do what they're told. They got nothing to do with making policy. You got to deal with them, but don't think that I shouldn't even have to tell you any of this anymore, should I? You can look into art, economics, the mores of any civilization, any society. You look into music. You look into religion. And you have got, if you are interested at all, enough to pick up a book and read about it. If you are magnetically drawn, then you pick up a book on economics. Assuming there must be people somewhere that have an interest in economics. I don't care to go into it, but if they do, and you've got just enough interest to pick up a book that says everything you want to know about contemporary economics or the history of economics, you will see, whoever the author is, he's going to start off. And I'm not quoting because thank God I have been saved. I've never had any inclination to read a book on economics. But I assure you that would open up, the preface would be, my friends, I'm going to tell you, based upon my expertise, something about the history of economics. The first thing to get in mind is this, that economics has two main schools. If you had enough interest, mechanically, magnetically, to be drawn to that book, and you began to read it seriously, you would also be drawn to immediately take sides. If you were just you at line level consciousness, just as soon, if this was your first real book, first real exposure to serious economics, whatever that is, as soon as the author divided them up, here are the two main schools I'm going to cover, just as soon as you read it, being a novice, you would immediately recognize, well, I see which one is based upon that which is valid, and I can see which one is obviously misled. It wouldn't take you but a half a page, a couple of sentences. Do you not find it curious that everything is arranged in such a way into this C and D camp? Apparently, that those who are interested immediately find their niche. That I didn't know anything about economics. I mean, I didn't know enough to even describe until I read this first half page of the author's preface. I did not know what the two main schools was, but now I know at least 100% more than I did, because now I see the line of reasoning, the line of thought, economics that is reasonable, profitably, and that which is fallacious. I can see that already. Do you not find it curious that anybody who is interested in anything, take up art, the history of art, history of literature, if you're interested to look into it, you're immediately going to see which is the proper course. It's outlined by some stranger that wrote a book or a pamphlet. You're immediately going to see which is the proper course. It'll just strike you immediately if you're interested. And likewise, it's going to strike you by his very simple detailing that line of thought of people who obviously got no business even being in the arts. They're idiots. No one finds that curious. No one finds it curious that electricity just seems to, or magnetism in general, just seems to have a north and south pole, and a positive and a negative charge. After all these thousands and thousands of years, no one's sick of that situation. No one wonders why we've made no further progress. We discovered two, and that's it. How about a small curious side trail into religion? Now, in religions, of course, the most common is to point out to you that all religions end up with an orthodoxy or an orthodox branch and then a liberal branch or a reform branch. Every religion that lasts more than one lifetime, one generation, is going to have a liberal branch and then an orthodox branch, which is conservatives and liberals taken into the church pews and out of the halls of Congress. It's the only difference at all. But this kind of side trail I was going to point out to you, I got enough of you going of late that some of you will like this. I assume you know it's fairly common in this part of the world and in the Western world that there are ideas that's been repeated for some generations now that I'm aware of in religion. And in fact, I think they took it somewhere from the Bible. I can't guarantee it, but it sounds like the kind of thing that came from the Bible. That our God, who it is speaking, is the same today, yesterday, and tomorrow. I mean, that's a God on whom you can depend. But that term has been used, especially in Protestantism, and I think it came from the Old Testament. So it's not limited to good old Christians. But our God is the same today, yesterday, and forever. But now, see if you can jump off this side trail right quick. If you get into areas outside, me using the Western world again as being the epitome of line level consciousness, the mechanical development of all the circuitry, you get into areas where the development is not that strong in the higher circuits. Less civilized people still in the world. And if you can't handle that, look back down the nervous system into the lateral history, times gone by, that less civilized, that is, people who have a less of a centralization in the higher circuitry, their gods did not quite fit that description. They were more capricious. Think about the gods of the Greek Roman eras. And I can assure you now we could find people in less civilized areas of the world right now that have their own little gods. But I assure you, they do not have things that the shaman or the witch doctor gets up and gives some little speech there in the village about, boy, our God, one thing I like about him, he's the same today as he was yesterday, and he'll be the same forever. That's not the kind of gods they have. They have gods that they can't depend on. They have gods that might come in, seduce your wife one night. Gods will get drunk. Gods will get in inter-family fights. They are not the same. Well, as I said, I guess more of you would be exposed to just think back to your college days of what little you didn't sleep through undergraduate history and Greek mythology. You know, the gods. Now, we look back now, I know some historians, and they take it with a somewhat of a grain of salt, but they took it fairly seriously as being gods and the stories they had of God. Just somebody'd come with a new story, it seemed like every week, that so-and-so God got mad and beat the hell out of some other God. You know, just for no reason. Up until now, he'd been a pretty decent guy, never been in trouble, and everybody go, yeah. All right, what I was getting to, I want you to see again. See if you can see this kind, I hadn't left the subject, of complexity. And complexity is not even the correct word, but there is no word that goes into the fourth dimension. I'd have to make it up, and I'd have to describe it, and I'd have to use 3D words, and so it's a waste of time. But here is, again, the master stroke with a spin on it. That inside the body of life, and to show you what ordinary consciousness will not see, is those that have less of a dependence on the yellow circuit. That is, those in the body of life right now that are not at life's highest level of consciousness. Now, I'm using the Western world as being the mechanical, the automatic, highest level on this planet in life's nervous system is simply a fact, the Western world. But at the same time, serving equally useful purposes, there are people on this planet, as we, even the Western world was some time back, that I was describing vis-a Greek mythology, that the less that they were developed in the higher circuits, the more freedom their gods had, to the point of being unpredictable. Then you get into the areas in the individual nervous systems of life, of man, to where there is, in a sense, a greater amount of freedom in that individual, in those group of individuals. There's more freedom that they can control the environment more, they live longer. Us. Then the gods have lost their freedom. Now the cry is that our gods is a God that is stagnant. And yet here at this time and place, it sounds right to many, many, many people. A God that is unchanging. Who wants a God you can't depend on? That's no God. That's some kind of dream. That's a delusion of the unsophisticated. A God on whom you can depend. And if I must remind you again, on that level of binary human consciousness describing dependable people, there is only one dependable person, and that is a dead person. That if indeed we're based upon human consciousness, we're not talking about any possible reality behind this, we're talking about human consciousness and the best it can perceive at line level. If indeed we have a God here in the Western world, or any group of people, we got a God, and the head prophet of this God, this group, this religion, or some combination, some school of head priests, and they say, one thing about our God that shows we got the right God is we're telling you, we know it, we feel it. He said so here when he told somebody else that I am unchanging. I was the same when I created this, I'm the same today, and I'll be the same if you came back here 1 billion years from now. Now they're talking about a dead God based on human consciousness. But what I wanted you to see was the kind of, to say the very least, complexity that within the simultaneous body of life in one area right now, there are people who have, in one sense, the greatest amount of freedom. That is, those who have the greatest development in the yellow circuit, us. And our cry seems to be for a stable, dependable God. You look back on the gods of the Greeks, or if we find out right now today that there was some area of the world on the South Pacific, some tribe was worshiping a god that lived with the porpoises, and they had all these stories about you couldn't depend on him, you could pray to him, and sometimes he'd come up and spit water in your face. Sometimes, as a joke, you'd pray for one thing and he'd send you the opposite. He swims away, and sometimes he stays gone for 20 years and he doesn't answer anybody's prayer. All right, it would be quite simple to an ordinary person in this time and place would say, well, what beautiful, simplistic people. You know, they're out of touch with the 20th century. It's fairy tales. It's not doing them any harm, I guess. Of course, at the other extreme would be some good old missionaries and say, let's go over there and convert them, make them see the light. But you would have this going on simultaneously in the last body. The less preponderance, or the less centralization there was in the yellow circuitry up here, the more people, that is, the more one area in last body has capricious, unpredictable, unstable gods. Do you hear me that it's using binary reasoning, just doing binary feeling? This is absolutely backwards. And they've got gods that are undependable, and they're right at home with them. That's God. That's God for you. Then you get to a place here that is more kind of freedom up here. More educated, more sophisticated. The circuitry is simply more developed. The kinds of molecular change that can take place in the nervous system of us is greater than it is in some isolated, less civilized group of people on a South Pacific atoll. It simply is. If you brought them here right now, it'd be an overload. They are not developed to the point, it's not the purpose, whatever life's doing with them right now, it's not their purpose to be able to absorb that kind of energy and to use it. So from that viewpoint, the only point I'm trying to show you is that we have more freedom. We know more about life, all the way from the physical aspects of what life is, to the workings of the human nervous system, to the fact that surely, as far as we can tell, you know, give me a break. Porpoises are not gods. So those people, we've all been through that. Our forefathers, we went through it. They'll grow up someday and find the right kind of God. They'll find our God. But, you know, porpoises are not gods. So you could say we have more freedom. But then look, the more developed, the more free, the more activated is the yellow circuit itself, it then begins to insist on a God that is not capricious, a God that is absolutely stable, a God that for all intents and purposes would be a dead God. That is the only way it could be unchanging. Now there is a general puzzle. I wasn't going to give it as another task this week, but I've just used one possible example, but it is a prime example. I'll go ahead and call it a puzzle. It's a kind of rhetorical question that I periodically present to you as how and for what purpose can this be going on in last bodies simultaneously? And when you get good, is abandon all that, and why is it that I can't see beyond that? There is something, some of you have seen a version of it, I've never really used it, of something I drew several years back. That was my name for it. I never told anybody. And it served, I intended it to serve, now that I finally brought it up to all of you, to give you some picturization of the fact that those who are bi-wired, B-I-W-I-R-E-D, can never see the third entity. And a part of this symbol that I invented if you look from here up, it appears to be two figures. C's 2. And if you look below here, it appears to be 3. It's all done with one line. It appears to be 2 supported by 3 if you split it up. If you'll also look, this third, can you see that what I'm describing is, you can see it as being legs, 1, 2, 3. That this one, in a sense, is not really a leg because it's a piece of the other 2 legs, and it's an illusion. If you just look at it here, if you just focus your attention down here, it's apparently a 3-legged object. And you look up though, and it's not really 3 legs. And this part, this middle leg, this middle support, is really on one side just the other side of this 1, and this side is just one side of this 2. And that you just let your attention turn up and down, and you look at the top and it appears to be some kind of 2-pronged object, and you look at the bottom and it's got 3 legs, and it's all one continuous line, and this leg does not really exist. Each side of this bottom leg is one side of this other, of either side of that top piece. Now, if you considered that we had here, call that C and call that D, and everyone keeps wanting to know what happens to E, I cannot, people send me notes, and some of you still ask. Some of you remember that I have several times referred to it as being the irrelevant. You know, how in the world can you consider the irrelevant if I see 2 things, 2 partners dancing? I see a struggle between 2 things, 2 ideas, 2 forces, 2 groups of people. And that is of some significance. How in the world can I consider everything else if it's irrelevant to start with? That which seems to anybody, no matter how you're wired up, anything that seems, whether it seems to be on a very personal level, an immediate level to you, or whether it seems to be on some greater level affecting large segments of society, anything that seems to you to be either a C or a D, I assure you, to somebody else, and perhaps someone inside the struggle, your C appears to them to be irrelevant. Not in theory, absolutely so. All the many names I gave it, we can still, you can look at C as like being that which is in charge of change, and D is like that which would be defensive. And to play with the King's English, the irrelevant I should really spell in a different way. Spell it with an E because it's not really irrelevant, but it just saved me from having to keep saying apparently irrelevant, because I assure you it's not irrelevant. So you're to consider it, since it fits in with my general use of those 3 things as being C, D, and E, is that there is always, from some view, from some place in life's body, and you might be a representative of that view at any given time, that what I'm seeing over here is some group, some idea, some propensity, some movement here in society or on this planet that is trying to create change. And then I see another that is defending that which the first group is trying to change. As long as you're limited to that binary wiring, as long as you are binarily blinded, all you can ever do, all that will ever happen through you is the participants can seem to shift places. Or if you live long enough and you're wired up in such a way, one of the group might overtake the other group, and then C and D would either become a new C or a new D, and it immediately would have its own opposition. That as soon as struggling factions, to put it back to a very physical level, as soon as one out of a group of warring factions in some country takes over and seems to absorb the communists, the fascists, the right wing, the ultra right wing, and then the moderately left wing takes over them all, they no sooner send up to Saks or somewhere in New York and get their little uniforms made, put themselves in office, and draw lots to see who is His Excellency and who is your Supreme Excellency. No sooner they get that done and get the hall set up, and the first banquet for the head man to come out with his hat and all the braid on, by the time they can do that, there's already a group out in the woods somewhere saying, "Fuck these people." And it won't be anybody necessarily that was identified with those that have just yesterday, been absorbed, beaten, routed. We now have the ultra-orthodox, liberated right-wingers, some new name. It will happen before they can get the banquet thrown, before they can pay homage to the new excellency. You're making a grave mistake, any of you, to take it as being philosophical, or to take it down to really, or to leave it at just a yellow circuit level, and by saying, which some of you have, and I know exactly what you were saying, because it was coming strictly from the yellow circuit, right at line level consciousness, and I'm an expert on that. Probably the world's leading expert, as I've told you. To say that I have heard this, I have read what you've written about it, and I see it in theory, but as far as I'm concerned, it's impossible to see. It can't be done. How can you see the irrelevant? How can you call it the irrelevant and then say that it's necessary to see it? I'm exaggerating a bit, but some of you, I'm just putting it all together and then reading some of your minds, that all right, I can see this binary struggle going on throughout life, but for you to say, and I hear it in theory, I hear it when you say, look, that's never explained anything. You can't get anywhere dealing with good guys versus bad guys, good versus evil, right wing versus left wing, me against the last generation. I see that, and you say that there is a third area that must be considered, and that just fills me with great hope the first time I heard it. I was so excited, and I was willing to buy a new book if you just tell me, all right, what it is, and you told me, and I almost heard that, except it can't be. Or if it is, I'll never see it. And at line level consciousness, that's true. Your partner in crime, your partner right there at the yellow circuit, told you the truth. That, hey, in theory, I hear him say, all right, there's C and D, and I can see that. There are two forces. And then he says, all right, there's everything else. Well, I can hear that. But there's the Contras versus the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. I can hear that. I know a little about the news. And all right, they're fighting for control. And then you say, all right, there's everything else in the world. All right, I can dig that. I mean, like you're talking about the World Series going on. You're talking about the Russians. You're talking about the Afghanistans. You're talking about the whales. You're talking about oak trees. You're talking about busted TV sets. You're talking about hippopotamuses who are not house trained. I understand. We're talking about the Contras. That's all right. That's one. Whether you think of them as being C or D, that's one of them. Then there is the establishment, as it is now, the Sandinistas. All right, we got C and D. Then you're telling me E is everything else. All right, I can hear that, but I ain't going to get anywhere with that. Even if you're correct, I can't do it. And of course, what Yellow Circuit is telling you, your partner is telling you, is not only can't you do it, nobody can do it. It's impossible, and it's telling you the truth. It's telling you we're not equipped to do this. We can hear it in theory, but we can't do it. It can't be done, and it's right. If it could be done, we're back to the old thing that this would be a simplistic matter. It'd be some kind of university. You'd have throughout history, you'd have Moses weekend retreat. Muhammad School of Culinary and Paradoxical Arts. You buy a book, take a short course, and that'd be it. But you're making the gravest of mistakes to say it cannot be done. Another way for me to try to get you to look at it, after all that little talk and some humor I threw in, based upon the kind of questions that I know people still have, besides those that are written and asked. It seems easy enough, in some situation to identify two forces, as I did with the Contras and the Sandinistas in the political climate of Nicaragua. And then to say, all right, anybody that is not involved with one of those two groups is part of E. For your yellow circuit, for your partner in yellow circuit crime and stupidity, to tell you the truth and say, I hear it in theory and it cannot be done. For you to stop there is the ultimate crime. But if you will try this, to shake yourself from being hypnotized, to shake your focus, this magnetic hole, that even after, in theory, your yellow circuit, you say, all right, I can see C and D. I can see the Contras and the Sandinistas, and then I hear you say E includes everything that's not one of those two, and it's just blinding. I can't do anything with it, and it can't be done. It's to change your focus. Not only just on something in which you may have no particular interest, such as the political situation in Nicaragua, but what seems to be a conflict between you and your sexual partner, what seems to be a conflict between you and somebody at work. The focus, the way the system, all the way from the yellow circuit on down to the red. We're just using, I keep referring to the yellow circuit right now because this is the one that wants to talk to you about, hey, these theories can't be done. They're instinct and it can't be done. It's true in all circuits, remember. The lower down you go to talk about the red circuit as though it could exist in isolation, this binary system works quite fine, thank you. And you got no business fucking with it. You should have some sanity in the yellow circuit based on a binary situation when you got here. But the further up you go is when the limitations begin to take hold, and when everyone thinks I am in some way been deprived, I am oxygen starved, there's not enough information, I want to find a secret teacher, I want to find a guru. My body's pretty good. I'm over, I don't think about suicide now over twice a year. I'm not all that depressed anymore, and I'm not hung up on drugs, but I feel like I am absolutely data starved, informationally starved, hence the old idea of secret knowledge. Something is driving me cuckoo. I am starving to death up here, and somebody knows it and they won't tell me. Therefore, they're hiding somewhere. The focus, if you begin to look at this, is you only focus as you're supposed to on C and D, no matter what it is, no matter what the situation appears to be to you personally. That's the only place you're focused. It's me and the person giving me problems. Change the focus. Take that which seems to be E, irrelevant, and force one of these others out. Take the Contras out of the picture for the time being and only try and focus your attention on the Sandinistas and everything else. Absolutely take away, since everybody can identify C and D. It's not even a problem of identifying it. It's identified as soon as you're aware of it. That's what I start out trying to point out to you again this evening. Anything in which you're interested has two armed camps. Maybe low-level hostility, but they're armed camps, or it would not be alive. Whether it be a school of art, a so-called area of music, literature, politics, economics, religion. There are two opposing forces. And if you're wired up to have any interest in it, as soon as you look at it, my half page in the author's preface in the book of everything you want to know about economics, just as soon as you read that much, if you're wired up to have any interest, you see the two camps. You see C and D. So take one of those that you can identify. All right, I got me and I got this person giving me problems, my sexual partner, my boss, an employee. I got those two down, and you tell me E is everything else. All right. I got two identified, but do you see, if you stay there forever, nothing will ever move. To keep thinking I will in some way figure my way out, or a blinding flash will come to me, or the idea of there being a third persuasion, a third entity, is some kind of theoretical something that only he can understand. You can see two of them, always. I see me and I see the people bugging me. I see me and what I want in some given situation, and those that apparently are opposing me. All right, so you got two of them. If you go the rest of your life crying, hey, I can see two, but God, I'll never see the third. You're right. But you got 2/3 of it narrowed down in any situation. Here's what you do. Try. Take one of those areas, one of those forces, whether it be represented by a person, a group, an idea. Take one of those and toss it aside and plug in that space E. Because if you leave your focus, if you leave your awareness attracted to and then held by that which is already wired into you, that, all right, it's me and my mother. This argument's been going on now for 50 years, and I still can't deal with it. I've been arguing with my boyfriend, my girlfriend now, for 5 years, and I can't seem to leave him or her. I could give you 2 pages of complaints I have against her, why she's probably not good for my spiritual development. But I can't seem to leave, and perhaps it's good for me to stay here and try to work it out. What do you think? You got two forces down. You got you and her, or in other cases, you got you and him. Take one of you out, just intellectually, just in the yellow circuit. Try it. It will change your focus. It will set up a very conducive situation that you might get a glimpse of this invisible leg that is inseparably tied, as my little symbol just happened to work out, that the third leg indeed is not even really a separate third leg. It's take out one of those that you can identify, that's just immediately identifiable, and then try and take the irrelevant, everything that is not one of the two, and plug it in to this would-be equation that you have been attempting to solve, that cannot be solved. You don't even know what you're trying to solve. It's just, I've got 2 things and it doesn't come out. But remember, if you're only dealing with 2/3 of reality, you can't ever get the right answer. No matter what the answer is you think you want, if you're only dealing with 2/3 of it, you can't ever get, let's use 100 to go to mathematics. You use 100 as being the right answer, the satisfying answer. I got this problem of me and this other person, me and this situation. And what I want is to be brought to a satisfactory conclusion. Then I will be happy. Then I'll be satisfied. Then I'll go on to bigger and better. It will never be satisfied, because the parts will never equal 100, no matter what you do. You can rearrange them forever, and it will not come out 100 representing whatever it is to you at that time would represent satisfaction, completion of the problem, of the situation. It will never work out. You just play with the problem the rest of your life as you're supposed to. But you have wasted, ultimately, all of this for any of you to seriously believe that it cannot be done. It cannot be done at the level it tells you it cannot be done. If you're talking about line level consciousness brought across here, you are right. It's telling you the truth. There's no sense arguing with that partner. When it listens to all this and says, all right, the irrelevant, everything that's not part of the 2 opposing factors I can always see in any, quote, problem, any situation, I can't see the rest. That partner is telling you the truth, but you had all your life to deal with him. He's no smarter than you are. And he is speaking the truth for his function. It cannot be done. You cannot see all 3, if they indeed exist, which I almost can hear it when he describes it simplistically, but hell, you can't do it. He's telling the truth. You might as well get over it. You should have been over it a long time ago. He can't do it. You can't either. You're no any better than he is. You're partners. That's why I used the term last week. Nobody's in charge. You're partners. He's no better off than you are, and you're no better off than he is. But you can take that which you can immediately identify as, all right, this is 1 and 2. This is C and D. I got 2 of them down. Take either one of them and set it aside, and then take the irrelevant and attempt to plug it into it. You have set up situations that many of you have already experienced, but you have set up better conditions for some of you to begin to get a glimpse of an area wherein you are not limited to binary blinders. Can any of you, I'm just going to use several questions that I've gotten from you people over the last 4 or 5 months, and some I've gotten in the mail from some of the other cities. I'm going to pull 2 or 3 of them that I can remember that I've been putting on hold into some of this. Can any of you begin to see that the multiplicity, the contradictory voices of all of humanity is absolutely, it's in another dimension, but you can hear me, it is absolutely equal to what seems to be the various eyes within an individual person? That the apparently contradictory aims, the contradictory attempts that life does, developing industries of such a nature that 5 years later, another part of life's body hollers, "God damn, you're choking us to death. You're going to destroy the planet." When where it started seemed to have quite admirable results in serving a real purpose. Of course, as long as you're limited to the binaries, then your left is always being a critic of life. You have always wired up to take sides. All right, progress is one thing, but we've gone too far over here. There's no doubt, I'm well read enough, we're on the verge of killing this planet. When, if you're wired up another way, there is just absolutely no reason to think that. Just none. Oh, I mean, yeah, there's several instances. I know as many as you do of what we've done. But so what? There's no basis whatsoever to believe we're about to destroy the planet. So people are wired up in this one situation, the, quote, environmental problem. People are wired up all over this planet on one side or the other. Of course, there's some that say, I don't even know anything about it, I'm not interested in it. You always got that. But of course, from those who are interested in it, those who are not interested in it are the kind of people with which we cannot much longer up with put. They're not civilized, they're not socialized, they simply do not understand the severity of the problem. But can you see? You can see it in yourself, you can see it in everyone else, that it is as though inside of ordinary people, including good old yours truly out there, that, hey, I got all these people in me that I can't control. It's just like I can't decide anything. Every time I decide I want to do something, I'm going to lose weight, there's somebody else in me that says, ooh, you picked a hell of a time to say that. There is a brand new chocolate chip cookie out that my friend says borders on being devilish. That no matter what I do, there seems to be some kind of internal conflict in me. Can none of you see that that operates on another level? You don't have to be that mystical. But rather than being the critic of life, rather than seeing in this binary condition that life is either running amok and we got to change, or else the people who are trying to create change are making us run amok. If we would stay back like our founding fathers, like our forefathers intended, like religion used to be, like the grand old Democratic Party used to be, if we could only stay that way instead of all these wide-eyed liberals coming through, we'd be all right. Instead of seeing that as being some display of insanity on the opposing camp's part, instead of seeing that through binary eyes as being proof that there is a great struggle between good and evil, or sanity and insanity, can you see that life has its own multiplicity of eyes? And you're one of them. We're not here to feed anyone's imaginary so-called ego. You're not really one of them. You don't amount to shit. But all you got to do is look around, and whatever group it is that you agree with, you and perhaps 10 million others amount to one passing voice in life. It is another way, once you begin to get a glimpse of it, that ordinary consciousness, not just everybody else, but you, can see that that which passes as being obviously proofs of man's passing insanity, forces of goodness over in one political camp, forces of evil in some other part of this planet, and that some way we got to be brought together. Some way everybody's got to see the light. Everybody has got to come to a reasonable Christian or Jewish or a Muslim, decent consensus of opinion that the way things are now, it is simply the stepchildren of the Tower of Babel. Life is not that much different on another scale than you are. You and everyone else. It's as though I am filled, says an ordinary person, if they could say it. It's as though I am filled with just a multitude of different people in here, more or less answering to my name. And you think life is that much different? You think in some way life is freed from you? You think in some way you're freed from life? Rather than seeing these contradictory opinions, be they economic philosophies, political persuasions, religious adventures, as being either reasonably sane, enlightened people as opposed to crude, feral barbarians, it can be seen, and this is just a lateral expansion, it can be seen as there is not insanity going on. It is not a struggle between sanity and insanity or goodness and evil. It is a multiplicity of necessary voices within the body of life itself. Several more little things. I've had people point out to me they didn't mean to necessarily, both here and out of town, of taking some task I gave, and then pointed out to me in ways that verged on displaying a certain amount of humor toward it, all the way from that to a bit of sarcasm, to a bit of fear. Let me remind all of you people here and everywhere else, you people on tape away from me, that if I slip up at times and I let some of these tasks get on tape, and then you people, some of you try them, if you go out and by any definition, if you harm yourself, you have not done the task. And it carried far enough, if I knew about it, I'd throw you out. I'd just throw you out on the basis of a very common standard, and that's supreme dumbness. I mean, dumbness is not even up to line level stupidity. It's below that. It's almost terminal dumbness. I don't care what the task is. Me to tell you several weeks ago a task, to try and do something that would be unseemly, as far as you could tell, to a more evolved man. That does not require that you go out and insult somebody and get punched in the nose. That does not require that you call up your mother and insult her. It does not require that you in some way act hostile toward your employer and he fires you. If you think that you have done any task, if you think that you have done anything profitable, you're an idiot, whether you live here or in some other city. I understand there's some in other cities. I'm almost sure of it. If not, we have some here, we can send some, and we can plant seeds in other cities. I've had several questions along this line of some of the newer people. All right, cut the tape. All right, I was going to mention that several people that's been exposed to this for some length of time have presented me questions, some of them sort of rhetorically, based upon this, that they get a kind of impression that they should not be living under great amounts of ordinary stress and anxiety. And then some, it comes about sort of this way. It's the yellow circuit, at the very least, presenting this scenario of, all right, it's the person interview and your partner talking. All right, what I conceive now to be anxiety and pressure, if I could do away with that, could I actually function? Could I get my work done in my place of employment if I didn't feel any pressure? And they present this scenario, surely I don't have to take it any further, that reasonably, based upon good old yellow circuit words, the king's English, the king's logic, assuming kings ever had any, that what I now perceive to be anxiety and pressure, if in some way it was mystically removed from me, I'm not at all sure that I'd get my work done. I'm not sure I'd get my work done in a proficient manner if I didn't feel the pressure. I'm going to school again at night, and all my life, even though I've always been around a 4-point average, I'll wait until the last minute to do a whole term's worth of work. But I always succeed. It seems to do me good. It seems to be the way I'm wired up. If this was taken away, my life might fall into ruins. This is, some of this, or it should sound for me to some of you, it's just a variation. There's nothing wrong with it, or I wouldn't respond to it. Of other questions, it's always a question of, hey, what would I be like if I was more evolved? That's what it is. What would it be like if I was enlightened? Tell me, tell me. Because then they take their you and your partner take your imagination or some of the things I've said of me, saying that it is not proper to be under so-called stress. That understanding what's going on is freedom from stress. It's probably cheaper than Valiums. I know it's cheaper than alcohol. It's cheaper than most street drugs. Joke, joke, joke. But this is a variation of saying, well, wait, I hear verbally some of the things I'm sure you're saying, but what if all that was suddenly imposed upon my life, the way I am now? How would it be if I suddenly had the kind of internal connections and wherewithal of a Moses or a Jesus or a Muhammad, and I was still me? And they suspect the worst, and they are correct. If that could be done, and suddenly you are this great enlightened master of some kind, and you are still you, you are right to worry. You are right to be very concerned, because I would not want to even be in the same hemisphere with you. I can only assure you of the continuing justice of it all, that it does not happen. Those of you who have not been around long enough to hear it, there was a person one time that was, since I was in this city, and did some initial talking when the first group got started, and they came to me with a story about how happy they were to hear the first couple of public appearances I made, and I said some things, and it was on the basis of just pointing out in general how limited people were in their experience and how the forces of old habit. I was using fairly common terminology, and how people are limited, and how there were things going on right here in one's own society, one's own community, that was legal. Just pointing out in general how limited people were in their experience and how the forces of old habit. I was using fairly common terminology, and how people are limited, and how there were things going on right here in one's own society, one's own community, that was legal, fairly morally acceptable in some cases to one group, and was not to another group, or were to some individuals, not to others. And did you not find that curious? That all ideas of some enlightenment, spiritual or intellectual, would have to go past such limitations. And it was something along those lines. That's been some years ago, but that was the general gist of it, the way the person heard it. And they sent me a note that they couldn't continue with this. It was a middle-aged woman, and this was back some years ago. And she gave me the reason she couldn't continue, but how pleased she was to have heard me speak several times, and plus she had, without any doubt, gotten a great deal out of this, because she did go against these kind of ingrained habits, and she reached down into the bootstraps of her own emotional, social, and spiritual wherewithal, and forced herself to go out and see some pornographic movies. And that she really had developed a lot of spiritual growth from this, and she was going to continue along these lines I'd laid down, and to help herself. I assume I don't have to say any more. Those that are not truly and properly attracted to this could, in other words, say, hey, I'm going to go against these kind of mechanical limitations I have, and all my life I've always thought, boy, I hate dirty movies. But since you recommend it, and you're a man of spiritual qualities, I'll force myself. In fact, it was so hard for me to do the first week. I've been doing it now for the last 40 weeks, and I seem to be gaining a great deal of spiritual development from that. All right, someone could hear something about anxiety, what I was getting at, and say, well, listen, I never have like the kind of pressure that my immediate supervisors put on me at my place of employment, so based on what you said, I just kind of shrugged it off. And after a couple of days, they pointed out to me that I wasn't living up to my work, and I said, listen, I've decided that anxiety and pressure sucks, and I ain't gonna put up with it, and I'll get my work done whenever I please. And can you believe that those fuckers fired me? It's not to say that that cannot happen, but that has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with this. And those that are properly attracted to this, it is not going to happen. Now, I don't bring this up, surely you know by now, to make fun of the question, but there is still a justice involved. If somebody just heard me say that, or I could have written that down in one of those books I had published, and somebody could say, hey, there is a spiritual person, I'll bet. I can just tell everything about the book and the way he writes. Boy, he is spiritually enlightened, and he said anxiety is not good for inner development. And so I told my employers that, and they fired me. Yeah, you don't write me. Of course, they're not going to write me. Justice still prevails. They don't write me. They don't blame me. But it's like, hey, I really went against myself and my mechanical inclinations, and I have been every week for the last 40 weeks of going to see triple X films. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with getting fired, but it's got nothing to do with this. And it's playing what if. That if all the routine anxiety and pressure that I have experienced all my life was taken away from me, I'm not sure I could function out in the ordinary world. That's right. You would not function as you do now. There is no way that anyone can profitably play with anything that you don't understand. I've said that in how many different ways. It's ignore that for the time being, that you cannot control, that you cannot produce whenever you want to, whether it apparently is hallucinations of higher forces talking to you, that you find some new game from a lost continent where you can throw down 2 sticks and a bone and the top from a peanut butter can, and it in some way will reveal the future to you. You know, don't bother to write me about that. Don't tell me about that. If you do not understand what you're doing, if you can't control it, if you say, sometimes I'm doing the numbers and I see purple flashes, sometimes followed by pink polka dots, what's the meaning of that? Nothing. Something's going on in your nervous system. Perhaps you have a headache. Perhaps you haven't been eating good. Maybe you need glasses. Maybe you need to go to a neurosurgeon, but you needed all that before you got here. It means nothing. If you cannot control it, if you cannot produce it, if you do not understand it. So for anyone to think, well, if all the anxiety was taken off me the way I am now, I bet I couldn't produce the work that's necessary for me to keep my standard employment. That could be true, but that's got nothing to do with me. It's got nothing to do with this. It's got nothing to do with anything but the way the world is hardwired. Anytime that you, from any viewpoint, that you truly found yourself have been harmed and you blame it on some connection with this, you should get the hell out. I've told you beforehand, it's not an excuse, it's an absolute fact. You can't be hurt by this. If you don't belong in it, something will happen to you. If I don't throw you out, then you end up with some imaginary complaint against me, somebody else here. It's all irrelevant. Doesn't matter. Means nothing. But you're also wasting your time assuming that there is some basis for your being here to worry about imaginary problems. You're worrying about problems that you can't even see. You're worrying about problems that you spot two-thirds of. Well, what if this happened, and then what if they did that? You're back to the dance. You're back to the imaginary struggle. It's not going to happen. If it does, you didn't belong in this. Nothing in this will harm you in any way. And if you find that in some way that you feel like, well, I've been harmed, I did something that was certainly not profitable to me, and I'm sure it was something you said, something you suggested. I'm not trying to relieve myself of any responsibility, but that is not what this is about. You simply found something that you were hardwired to, and you couldn't resist it. But no task, no matter how you might attempt to explain it before or after the fact, no task is to cause you any harm. You haven't done it correctly. You're not even trying to do it, and you should question very seriously that even if you belong here. Since we're playing, the original theme was binaries and then some, de-binaries and then some. But I got another one. It just so happens, as some of you might know, the great illustrious body of the United Nations is celebrating their 40th birthday and being generally exposed to the news like the rest of you. There have been celebrations and ceremonies going on for the last 4 or 5 days up in New York. I guess the greatest collection of potentates, kings, prime ministers, dictators, presidents, and other assorted folks being up there, and there's been evidently just a non-ending string of speeches from all these dignitaries. And I have been exposed through the printed, visual, or oral medium, as I assume some of you had, to hear some of these people stand up. People that you may or may not have heard of, presidents of obscure countries that some of you may have never heard of. Very intelligent in a certain sense, or they would not have that position. They are serving a particular purpose in life's body. Anybody that reaches that position, whether it be through force or through political intrigue, as it's called, but for them to end up in that position, a spokesman for some group of people in charge, they are serving a particular purpose, and it's a particular purpose that is beyond that of bricklayers. It's beyond that of painters and musicians. That's not simply a quantitative analysis of it, but it is serving a particular purpose. They're very good employees for life. Life thinks very highly of these people. So when it brings them up very high, it'll cut them down like dogs. It'll cut them down overnight. That's why the guys invented coups. It'll let them just gain power, apparent horizontal power over hundreds of thousands of people. That's why the gods invented secret Swiss bank accounts. And it's also why gods invented coups. But there have been an endless stream that I just caught pieces of, and if I didn't, you won't know the difference. I could just be making this up, but if you go back and look, you'll find I didn't make it up, even though I may not have even seen it there. But them discussing one after another, many different languages, certain looks on their face, world leaders, positions of power. They're not idiots in the ordinary sense of the word, as I'm telling you. Those people are particular, valued employees of life's corporation. Very necessary. But they're pointing out, they go through a short history of the last 40 years on this planet, WW2, the aftermath of the big war, the terrible economic, social situations in many areas of the world, perhaps the various faults of the United Nations, but what would be the alternative? How much worse would it be without it? The great strides that humanity has made in the last 40 years, but the great pollution, the great opportunities that we've had, and the many times we've missed the opportunities, that people are still starving as they were 40 years ago. Not only are there still conflicts going on of man against man on this planet, it is now no longer a matter of dropping incendiary bombs on London and destroying thousands of lives. It's a matter of dropping one bomb and destroying half the planet. It's no longer a matter of whether we can improve technology. We can improve technology so fast that we can't even clean up after ourselves. We're poisoning the rivers. We're on the verge of a great abyss. Man after man sitting up there saying that. And they all end up with something about themselves, humanity, about it's our duty to work on these problems. This is our duty to try and fulfill the initial aims of the United Nations. This is our duty to try and fulfill the aims of whatever religion they espouse. You know what it is? That was a long setup. If they would invite one person that I could write their speech, if we could suddenly dress up one of you in a suit or a funny hat or a robe and get you on and let you get on that parade, tell them you won't be up there but a second. Say, I have listened to all of my illustrious, intelligent, honorable fellow dignitaries that preceded me and have laid out the missed opportunities, the faux pas, the indignities that we have fostered one upon another and upon the planet. I've heard them all. I'm aware of it. I have, in fact, learned a few that I was not aware of. And I've heard them all speak of the duties that we owe ourselves, our gods, the planet, the universe. And after hearing all this, I'll conclude with this to tell you, man's duty is to worry. Thank you. If you're binary, which to be a world leader, you got to be binary. To be a alderman, you got to be binary. To be on the board of education, you got to be binary-minded. So all the way from that down to the common man, you should remember, you should be able to see it as part of being binary. It is a part of the limitations of consciousness. It is your duty. It is your duty. I don't care what your religion, your race, your nationality, it is man's duty to worry. Don't you forget it. Unless you understand it. I didn't intend to leave that at just a one-liner unless it had a bigger effect, and then I would not be saying what I'm just saying. You know by now, it's not a joke, not being funny about the great world leaders, not being funny about anybody. But do you see, can you begin to get some sensation of what binary consciousness is on this planet? It is part of the makeup of humanity. That which passes for celebration. We're here to celebrate. I'm all dressed up. I flew over 5,000 miles to get here. I brought over an entourage. We had to hire limos at $100 an hour. I had to rob the treasury to be here. I had to learn to speak a little English. But it all gets down to one thing. It is our duty, my fellow man, to worry. That's what we're here for, is primarily to worry. And you can dress it up any way you want to. You can close with a salam. You can appeal to the gods, appeal to the humanitarian instincts you hope of humanity. You can try and leave them with a joke. Do a two-step before you go. But the message is always this. It is our duty, my fellow man, my fellow woman. It is our duty to worry. If you are living in a binary world, that is a literal fact. It comes out under other guises, verbally, but it is your duty. It is your duty to worry. Because as long as you have two armed camps, by God, you've got something to worry about. Everybody does. All you got to do is be wired up enough to have the slightest interest. Oh yes, periodically I read the newspaper. Is Russia and us still kind of on the outs? Are we still, they got that system that they don't vote and all that crap? Oh, did I hear that they got that big old bomb too now? If I had more interest in it, I'd worry about that probably. And then you're informed, well, hey, there are a lot of people on this planet right now worried about that. I'm talking about seriously worried. You think, well, that worries me. All the way down to, that woman's been driving me crazy. But you know, she has not been arguing with me with the same kind of passion in the last couple of weeks. And plus, she sure has been doing a lot of late night shopping. The conflict begins to worry me. As long as everything is seen as a conflict, which it is, that may not be the term that you have ever used, but as long as you're dealing with what seems to be a C and a D, as long as it is a binary situation, it is a conflict. And you're going to worry about it. It is your duty to worry about it. If you're not worrying about any particular conflict that I could name or anyone else could name, it means one thing. You're worried about another one. It means that you are not wired up, that you just never have been wired up to keep up with politics. You know damn well the other country's got the bomb, and you know there's been world wars and we could blow ourselves up. I don't know, I'm just not wired up to worry about that. I worry about this. I worry about, when is the price going to come down on used Corvettes? They've changed the down body style drastically 4 years ago, and I'll be down, I still can't afford one. I thought the older body style, at least from the late 70s, but now I could afford one. I would have thought, all the time I spent going to draftsman school at night, I'm not making any more now than I did when I was a mud boy for a bricklayer. It is a worrying over a conflict. That it's C against D, whatever the situation. And as long as you're left to that, this is not in kind theory, there's nothing you can figure out, you need to just see it, and then to refocus your attention. As long as you're dealing with a binary world, it is your duty to worry, because it is a conflict. No matter how low level, no matter how immediately personal it seems to be, or on the other hand, no matter how global it seems to be, about world powers on the verge of annihilation. a binary situation leaves you doing your duty to the day you die, and that is your sacred duty to worry. I had a couple I liked so well, I think I'll save them. But wait, I had a few that I wanted to read here. There was one more that somebody brought up to me when I mentioned several weeks ago that the few people involved with this have no business fooling with the employees. And several people have written me fairly literal responses and curios in regard to that, pointing out that as long as you're out in life that they're having to deal with the employees. That's a fact, Jack. But now do you surely understand that I meant more? The only way that you could stop having any dealings with the employees is to hermetize yourself. Which even I don't do that. To fool with a D employee is to take it seriously. A kind of trilateral understanding, being able to see beyond binary limits. It is not that you are in concordance with the employees, that is, with the rest of humanity. What being able to see trilaterally does, having all your circuits expanded laterally to the point that you begin to excite and ignite another circuit, that the whole combination is greater than any individual part, it is greater than you could speak of, if there was any validity to it. Each of the circuits in isolation being totally developed as far as possible at your day and time. That kind of expansion, I can call it understanding, an understanding of the trilateral, triaxial basis of what passes off for reality in our consciousness. That kind of understanding produces a kind of agreement to life, but it is not an agreement with the individual actions of men. Because whatever profession you're in, whatever you're doing in life, some of your own family, I don't have to guess. I can assure you that all of you have got mothers and fathers that you know by now that I would told you to take extreme caution with, make specific arrangements before they die. There's all this thing to cut out that imaginary estrangement, that there is a special, a singular blood connection between you and your kin, and it should be seen and understood and then forgotten about. I don't have to guess, all of you have parents that I wouldn't want to be associated with. I mean on a very specific basis. You might have a father that's an avid hunter, that he just lives for the deer season. And I wouldn't associate with my own relatives, not on a serious basis, with anybody like that. It's not that they're evil, but the degree of their development, it wouldn't be just that would be the proof of it, but I have nothing in common with them, assuming I had anything in common with anybody on an individual basis. You should not be sitting around with somebody, if that's not strong enough. Perhaps you got an uncle that his hobby is beating up women. He likes to talk about it, you know, how much fun it is. He invites you out for a beer. You go to a family reunion once a year. You are not to sit around and fool with somebody who has a hobby that is so far down the evolutionary scale to be below line level consciousness for your time and place. You're not to fool with people like that. You don't have to be insulting. I'm not going to spoon feed you this. As long as you're in life, including your own relatives, you're going to deal with ordinary people. the employees. But you are not to fool with them. Your agreement, once you begin to understand it, I'm just giving you a little prior hint. You ought to be able to make some sense out of it. The understanding produces a total agreement with life. You got no choice. Once you see what's going on, there is nothing to disagree with. My comment of agreeing with life really is real funny. I mean, if there was anybody who understood it, I'd be ashamed to say it. It's so ridiculous. Your agreement is with life. You got no choice once you see what's going on, but it is not an agreement with the individual actions of humanity, because life has its own built-in contradictory voices, as though it were a multiplicity of different personalities within life. Life itself is growing. Who would want to live if life had a body similar to ours? Who wants to go and live in the lower intestine or the upper intestines? You know, I'd prefer to live in Buckhead or on Fifth Avenue or down in the valley somewhere. Who would want to live there? Personally, I wouldn't want to live in the kidneys, I don't think. I've never cared for damp climates. But it is not a matter, once you understand it, it's not a matter of agreeing with the individual actions of every human on this planet. Because part of what is going on is in the decalf. It has to be. And it could be your own family. The fooling, the way I put it to you, and I winked, I said it several times, and I made little faces. I was trying to use somewhat of a colloquial approach of saying don't fool with them. It's part of life, but they are not to be taken as serious companions. Their interests, their hobbies. And you have got to deal out in life, as long as you're living there, with the employees. You can look at in general that every third person is working for D at any given time. But you do not have to go out and sleep with them, dance with them, eat with them, socialize with them. And beyond that of what would seem to be my example's physical contact is even to hear about them, to imagine about them, and to let your circuits deal with it. It is necessary that there be people out there right now killing other people, or it would not be going on. But you are going to gain nothing. And there, obviously, it's still necessary that there be people starving to death on this planet, or it would not be happening. But you're not, there's no profit in you fooling with that until you understand it. To sit around and to fool with it in the privacy of your own head of how can it be that people would kill somebody else? How could somebody kill somebody in the name of religion? You're back to worrying. You're fulfilling your duty. You're limited to a binary world. I had a few I wanted to read. Last week when I mentioned the possibility or asking you, could any of you see that in a sense man's memory, faulty as it appears to be at times, could be seen from a certain viewpoint as being perhaps part of life's own DNA attempting to, from time to time, improve itself, improve its chances for development? And someone responded, yes, it does seem to me that life's memory could be described as life's DNA. Mankind, it seems, can learn from its mistakes wherein individual men, as opposed to mankind, cannot. And life remembers failures through cynics and pessimists. And mankind can remember successful experiments as well, so that they may be mixed with the cynical voices to build even greater experiments. A very fair and enjoyable observation. Regards to my comment last week that everybody is in a partnership. Someone notes, I believe that my, quote, partner enjoys a subtle suffering juggling about your mouse, but isn't all that interested in relinquishing the stage. If that's not conservative vaudeville, then I'm an oxymoron. And then last, in reference to our good friend Kyrute from some weeks back, it took this long for someone to digest this, I guess, or Wait till I read it all. Maybe it didn't take them this long to digest it. It took them this long to get up to write it. If life, he's referring back to Kairut, if life is indeed like gaudy upholstery, then the memory of man would seem to me to be like a plastic end table. Parentheses. Should I sign this or not?